Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Textile Talk. I'm Lucy Shakin, SAQA's Communications Coordinator and your Textile Talks organizer. Textile Talks are presented by the International Quilt Museum, Quilt Alliance, Studio Art Quilt Associates, or SAQA, and Surface Design Association. We love bringing you these free programs every week thanks to the support of our sponsors and contributions from viewers like you. If you enjoy Textile Talks, please consider making a donation at SAQA.com/TT-support. We have two phenomenal artists to share with you today, but first, a few Zoom notes. This is a webinar, so we can't see or hear you, but we can read your comments in the chat. We have enabled Zoom's closed captioning feature. You should be able to turn the captions on or off by finding the CC or Live Captions button. If you're on a mobile device, you might need to go into your settings to do this. Please put any questions you have in the Q&A box. And if you have suggestions for ways we can improve or for topics you'd like to see in future Textile Talks, please let us know in the post-event survey. Before we get started with our main program, I would like to tell you a little bit about SAQA's benefit auction, which starts this Friday. The annual benefit auction is our biggest fundraising event. Each year, our members donate 12 by 12-inch artworks to support the organization. The only requirement is the size, so as you can see from what's playing on your screen now, these pieces really reflect a huge diversity of style, materials, and subject matter. There's really something for everyone, and looking through all of this artwork each year is one of my absolute favorite parts of my job. There are more than 440 pieces available for purchase. The auction is a reverse auction, so that means the prices start high and go down each day. So this Friday, we kick off with Diamond Day, when any piece can be purchased for $1,000. Then on Monday, the prices in Section 1 go down to $750, and then $550, and so on, until they reach $100 on Saturday. The following Monday, the bidding pattern repeats with the next section, until the auction closes on October 6th. So the game is whether you purchase at a higher price, or wait, and risk someone else snapping up the piece you want. All of the proceeds from the auction support SAQA's programs, including Textile Talks. It's a great way to support the organization and bring home an original work of art. You can find all the details at SAQA.com/auction, and I encourage you to check it out, even if you don't plan to bid, just to see all the gorgeous, gorgeous artwork our members made. So now, on to today's program. Stitch Stories with Emily Tull and Nikki Parmenter. These two artists are very different, but they're both creating densely stitched figurative works, and they both have a focus on storytelling in their artwork. I'm very pleased to introduce today's first speaker, Nikki Parmenter. Hi, Nikki.
Hi.
Is based in Cheshire in the UK, and she has exhibited widely in group and solo shows in the UK and abroad, and has been written about in a variety of publications. Nikki creates large-scale, narrative, colorful, free machine stitched pieces that tell stories from diverse cultures, literature, and the natural world. Nikki, thank you so much for being here today. Let's get started.
Okay, thank you, Lucy, for that introduction. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to be able to talk to you all from Quincy in Cheshire, which is in South Manchester in the UK. As you can see, I'm an ex-art teacher, and it's fantastic to having retired, to have the opportunity to do my own workshops and exhibitions. So I'm going to talk to you tonight about the kind of work that I like to produce. I'm just trying to get the slide to move down one. It's not wanting to do at the moment. Right, here we go. So I've titled the presentation, Every Picture Tells a Story, and I'm going to show you some techniques and inspiration behind the textile and mixed media pieces that I make, looking at history, mythology, stories in the natural world, and in particular, my favourite technique of all, which is free machine embroidery. So I'm going to show you, first of all, two pieces, Fade Out 1 and 2, which, as you can see, are quite large, and these are based on the Great Barrier Reef. So this first piece is called Fade Out 1, and it's made in response to the theme of fragility. And I decided I wanted to make a piece of work which referenced the fact that the Great Barrier Reef is being destroyed by things like pollution. Sun cream is also damaging, and also plastics and pollution. So it's called Fade Out for obvious reasons. The top of the image is very much ragged, it's faded out, it's got lots of very subdued colours. The corals and the creatures are all ragged and pale. And I've used articles like scrim, I've used lace, I've used netting, and I've tried to create this effect of this kind of decaying, ragged effect using very pale colours. All of the pieces I do are drawn onto calico and then free machine stitched, although there are other techniques too, which I'll talk to you about. But in this particular instance, that's the technique I've used. So at the top of the image, you can see all of the decay that's happening. And then in the lower part here, you can see the very vibrant fishes and flora and fauna which are inhabiting the reef. Actually, in this piece, I used some real plastic to reference the fact of the plastic pollution. And having done that, I decided that I wanted to try to recreate the piece again, but this time using only plastics. So this again is a large scale piece, and I've actually done a technique which I call plastic entrapment, which is where I draw the image out onto a piece of paper, then trace it with a Sharpie pen onto a piece of plastic PVC. And then I make a series of layers. So the bottom layer has got a plain piece of PVC. In the middle, there are iridescent cellophanes and plastics. And then on the top of that is the tracing that I've created. And then those are all free machine stitched. So you can probably see here where I've free machine stitched all the way around the eye and the body of this lionfish. The next piece is also from the same image. This is from Fade Out 2, which is made entirely with plastic. And I took it to the extent of even stuffing the lobster with bubble wrap to just keep that theme going. And you can see also the antennae here are made from some plastic tubing also. The next piece is a companion piece to the two that you've seen previously. And again, it focuses on the idea of pollution and plastic pollution in particular. And for the inspiration for this one, I looked at some prints by a Japanese artist called Hiroshiga, who was working in the 1700s. And the image I've chosen is of koi carp. So I'm there for scale, so you can see again that the pieces are really quite large. And I've called this one Two Fishes. And so it looks like the Pisces logo. And we've got these two fishes swimming in a sea that's polluted with plastic. And Two Fishes references the biblical quotation. And then all the way around the edge, I've put references to the issues that are happening at the moment in the ocean. So 1 million plastic bottles are purchased every minute. We have a responsibility. Oceans are so vast and so mysterious. And all of those quotations are by David Attenborough. So I do like to look at contemporary issues as well in my work. The next series of images I want to show you is actually a triptych, which, as you know, consists of 3 images that are displayed together. And the first of the triptych pieces I want to show you is called The Wild Swan at Cool, and that is 150 by 150 centimetres, which is 5 feet by 5 feet. So The Wild Swan at Cool is actually a poem by W.B. Yeats that he wrote in 1917 in Ireland. And the quotation that I put from the poem, which is stitched on the top of the image here, is, "But now they drift on the still water, mysterious, beautiful. Amongst what rushes will they build? By what lake's edge or pool delight men's eyes? When I awake some day to find that they have flown away." Now, this triptych was actually made in response to a theme of Odyssey, an exhibition theme. So my concept was to look at the swan and see how it travelled from one place to another. The swan in this particular image, taken from the photograph here, is drawn onto calico with a biro, and then I've added a lot of acrylic paint. So there's actually no stitching at all on the swan itself. But the poem, the verse from the poem, is actually is machine stitched using the plastic and the cellophane technique I showed you before. And also the water is produced in the same way. So the wild swan is there one day, and then the next day it's flown off, it's gone on an odyssey to another place. So the swan that you can see here on the right-hand side, you'll actually see shortly in the next image. So the second of the triptych pieces is the Conference of the Birds, and this is even bigger. This is 240 by 120 centimetres. That is 8 feet by 4 feet. And this is based on a book, a poem called The Conference of the Birds, written in the 12th century. And it's a spiritual quest in which 30 birds go in search of a mythical bird called a simorg. And they're led on this quest by a hoopoe. So the hoopoe surrounds himself with these birds, and he asks them to join him on his journey. And he says, "Join us, and when at last we end our quest, our king will greet you as his honoured guest." So you can see here the hoopoe is partly done. This is done with drawing onto calico with paint and biro, and then I've free machine stitched that. The bird here, the parrot and the flamingo, are done with plastic entrapment technique, and the kingfisher is done by drawing onto calico and machine stitching. And this is a section of the final piece. It's a little bit too large to show you completely in a photograph in this instance, but you can see the hoopoe there surrounded by all sorts of different birds, some of them done with plastic, some with free machine embroidery, and I've also made sure that all of the birds are in the main looking at the main bird for guidance. So the birds fly off looking for a mythical bird, which I'll tell you about in a second. But you can see here the wild swan is centre stage, taking up the main focal point of the image. So the birds fly off to the third image in the triptych, which is called the simorg. Now the simorg is a mythical bird, which is very similar to a phoenix. And it lives in the tree of life, and it actually has such huge claws and a beak that it can actually hold an elephant in its claws and in its beak. So the swan flies into here, and when the birds arrive at the simorg, they actually realise that the enlightenment that they were looking for, they found within themselves. So it's a spiritual journey to the divine. Apparently, this is how it's how the explanation of the poem is pans out. So it says here, there in the simorg's radiant face they saw themselves, the simorg of the world, the simorg trust's last flawless jewel. So as I say, they do find the enlightenment within themselves. And at the bottom of the picture, bottom right, the swan is walking off into his next adventure. And the next image actually shows the sizes of these pieces. So this is at Chester Cathedral in the UK. And you can see I just about managed to fit the pieces on the screens, which were 8 feet by 4 feet in size. So the next set of slides is looking at a myth about Sedna, who is a sea goddess in the Inuit or the Eskimo tradition. And have I missed a slide? Sorry, yeah. So for this particular image or set of images, I've taken inspiration from this book, which is called Art Forms in Nature by somebody called Ernst Haeckel, who was a German zoologist and evolutionist. And he produced this amazing book, amongst others, with images or prints of flora and fauna. And they were very detailed. They very much looked like designs within themselves. And they were seen as a marriage of science and art. He was born in 1834 and died in 1919. And I was fascinated by the circular images. These are corals and sea urchins. And I decided that I was going to use these images to inform the next image that I've previously referred to, which is called Sedna. So Sedna, quite an interesting story. She was an Inuit girl, and the myth is that she ran away from home to marry a man who actually turned out to be a trickster. So he actually was a bird who took the form of a man. So the man turned himself into a curlew, and he treated Sedna very badly. So Sedna's father was enraged and he went to retrieve Sedna in his kayak. The trickster, the bird, was furious and created a huge storm which washed Sedna overboard. Her father wanted to save himself, so he refused to let her get back into the boat. And it sounds rather gory. He chopped her fingers off, and these became fishes, seals, and walruses. And so therefore Sedna became the goddess of the sea. So you can see here, there's the father in his kayak, the curlew, and this is Sedna, who's contained within a piece of coral, actually falling into the sea. And these images are also taken from the Sedna piece. So these are all based on the Ernst Haeckel round images. And these are free machine stitched again with lots of plastics and also quite unusual household items. I think you may recognize here some curtain hooks. So again, I tried to stick to the plastic theme and I used all sorts of different things like sequins and straws and plastic rope and that type of thing to create these pieces. And these are also some of the images that I included. So these are flying fish, which have been done using the plastic entrapment technique, and then also some crabs and some shells produced in the same way. And this is the final piece. It's quite difficult to photograph. This is the central panel, and you can see that I've got a lot of creatures here. I've got the seahorse, I've got Sedna, and I've got some more of the circular images here with the plastics, and also some more flying fish. And this is another panel, which is actually this section here. And this has got a lot of pieces of, again, fabrics, some bits of lace, and also plastics in there to create the idea of the weeds and the seaweed. And then the final slide I'm going to show you, or the final image, is a piece called St. Werburgh and the Geese, which will be on display at Chester Cathedral in the UK from the 7th of October to the 8th of November this year. And this piece again is 240 centimetres by 120 centimetres. And this one also tells a story, because as I said, I enjoy looking at myths and legends. And this is 8 feet by 4 feet. And it's inspired by a stained glass window. The exhibition is actually celebrating the life of a stained glass window artist called Trina Cox. So St. Werburgh lived in the 700s AD, and she was a Benedictine abbess. And she was interested in a flock of geese, which lived in Chester. And one night, the cook caught and cooked one of the geese. And when St. Werburgh found out, she was absolutely furious, and she resurrected the goose. And from then, she's always displayed, surrounded by geese at her feet. So this isn't quite finished yet, but I'm actually doing a life-size cartoon piece to accompany the actual window itself. So you can see here, there are some pieces which still need to be stitched, and there are some pieces which still need to be completed in terms of the drawing. But I discovered brilliant new material, which is called iridescent holographic vinyl. And when you sandwich that between the plastic, you get this amazing effect where if you move, the light catches the vinyl in a different way, and you can see the colour change. So it's quite an interesting effect as the light changes and you change position. So those are all the slides that I have for you now. I hope you've enjoyed that, and I'm very much looking forward to receiving some questions for you afterwards. So thank you very much for watching.
Thank you so much, Nikki. That was just phenomenal, and it was great to see all those gorgeous, gorgeous images of Nikki's artwork. We'll have Nikki back on in a few minutes for Q&A. And now I'm pleased to introduce Emily Tull. Emily is based in Kent, England. She's been exhibiting in solo and group shows since 1998 in venues in the UK and abroad. She's won a variety of prizes for her work and was a contestant on Sky Art's Portrait Artist of the Year, which is a show that I personally love. Emily is particularly interested in underdogs, whether they are endangered bees or human beings. Her work tells stories that highlight the natural world or hint at people's private lives. Emily has work in SAQA Global Exhibition Aviary, opening next week at the Gadsden Art Center and Museum in Quincy, Florida, and in the RWA 171 Annual Open Exhibition in Bristol, England. Emily, thank you so much for being on Textile Talks today. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Thank you for joining us today. I've called my talk Fragility. It was quite interesting to hear Nikki mention that word as well, because it's a theme that kind of runs throughout all my work. But I thought I'd start with a little bit more about me and how I work. So I come from a fine art background. I was a painter for many years before I switched to stitching. I still consider myself a painter, and that all my artworks are paintings. They are all hand stitched, and I'm self-taught. I'm not a technical stitcher. It is pretty much, I make it up as I go along. It's very organic. I might start with a sketch from a sketchbook, but I use my gut and my eyes to kind of lead me through a feeling of the look and actually how the artwork feels to me, which might end up as being very different to the original drawing that I have done. So I've always been drawn to the broken, damaged, unfinished things in life. My early stitched work was inspired by Egyptian tomb paintings, portraits that were very worn away and badly fragmented. The majority of my portraits have and continue to be influenced by torn wallpaper, alongside billboards, peeling paint. And in this big image, this is like chipped away, I guess it's plaster from an exterior of a building. So these are all photographs that I've taken on when I've been out and about. I've got quite a large selection of these photographs now that help inform me with the shapes that I might use in my work. So this piece is the first of my wallpaper inspired series, which started in 2016. This is 12 by 12 inches, so that's about 30 centimeters. My portraits, as I was just talking about, the shapes of things that I see while I'm out and about. This series, they're created by the layers of ripped wallpaper and advertising boards. These accidental patterns and layers left behind represent a sense of history and time, especially in a home setting. In these portraits, the layering of fabric wallpaper represents the layers of skin, life, and history. They are never complete. They are just a hint of a person remaining, and it's left to the viewer to complete the person and to create a story for them. And this is what drew me to Egyptian tomb paintings originally. There was one that was really badly broken up, and it was really faded, and you could only just about make out the face in there. And I love the fact that I just stood there in the museum and just tried to complete the picture. So it was like a jigsaw in my brain, and that I created a whole backstory for them. The portraits have a fragility, but a strength to them as well, whether that be in the source of the inspiration, to the manipulation of the materials during the making process. These upper areas of the portraits are often sandpapered to distress them. So here in this detail here, you can just see that there's slight rough edging to them, and it all depends on what fabric I use to how much they distress. I do prefer to use more natural fabrics in terms of that, because they're much easier to pull apart, and I don't necessarily need to use sandpaper to do that. But it's also down to human nature. People are strong and fragile at the same time. In the early portraits, I felt like the stitching was rebuilding and mending and almost patching the person onto the background. And I do feel that still when I create the works, but now I'm much more focused in the likeness of a person and the coloration of the skin. In the last few years, there's been a shift in my portrait work as well. Most of the time, the title will inspire a person, whether that be their appearance or something about their personality, but the portraits have never been deeply connected to that person. It was more about their look. But now the works have become much more personal, and I like to connect to things that has happened to the person's life. And for me, the title is the foundation of the work. It's the starting block for me. It helps me to create what that feeling is going to be. It will make me think of materials that I'm going to use. I mean, mainly in the wallpaper series, I do tend to use more floral and fabrics that look like they could potentially be wallpaper. The titles can be quite abstract in their feel, which can help lead to different ways that a story can be built for them. And I really don't like to start a artwork before I have a title, or sometimes I feel it quite unsettling if I don't have one in place before I start, because it really, for me, in my head, it really is quite important. I often use poetry, things that I hear people say, quotes, song lyrics, and misheard lyrics as well for title ideas, but I do also come up with my own ideas for them too. And our connection to nature has been an evolution of the two strands of my work, the portraits and the wildlife, from the use of wildlife pattern fabrics, like in this portrait of my uncle and his favorite animal, the panda. It's quite a fun, bold image type for me and my work. This portrait was it was a comment really on our use of social media, and him in particular, his kind of social media persona that he puts out there. So the photo reference I used that he gave me had been a from a photo that he'd used as a portrait picture for his profile. And then, of course, I've got his favorite animal, which he does post about a lot on Facebook. So there's a nod to this image that we want to portray of ourselves. But alongside wildlife material, I've also connected with actually creating stitched elements of wildlife. And this is a series that is ongoing. So this was the first one that I did of my brother. And in this piece, the beard crawls around on your face. It's about the tightrope between humans living alongside nature. And it's a real fine line. And I wanted a calm piece of we can live between, you know, together in one space. Hence he has fungi, he has flowers, insects, animals, all kind of entwining in his hair, climbing and growing in the hair on his head, and in the moustache bit of his beard too. Although I wasn't allowed to put anything in the nostrils. That was a rule that he gave me. There was also a nod to my family. There's little secret pieces that I've used, certain species of flower and wildlife that I've used that connect to my family. A bit like in my portrait of my uncle, where I've used the panda. We, as a family, we do tend to connect wildlife to ourselves as well, which I will go on to with the next artwork. So as humans, we often connect specific wildlife to ourselves, whether that be like a spirit animal, or just our favorite animal, things that we kind of connect to in various ways. This is a portrait of my mum. I've done 3 portraits of her now, and each one has had wildlife in them. She is the only person that has had that connection in each of her portraits. This one is about her relationship with the birds in the garden, in particular the house sparrows. Now, the house sparrows rule the garden. They are lovingly known as the hooligans, and they don't like it when you're in the garden, but they certainly like to be fed. And this is why they are in full stitch mode. They are the most important thing, because the garden is theirs, and also these birds are endangered. And my mother is like this ghostly figure kind of dancing around them, because you've got to kind of move about so they, you know, quite lightly and quietly so you don't disturb them too. So she's got much more of a drawn look, but it is all hand stitched. So wildlife, I predominantly focus on British wildlife, like this otter, and that's about 10" by 10". And sadly, in this country, we have many endangered species. So I feel that my role is to promote these species, to be on the side of the underdog, and to hopefully educate people on the wildlife around them. Some of my artworks are inspired by museum displays, especially the rows of insects that you can get in the glass displays. So with this pot of flower bee, this is a part of 3 different bees that I made that go into glass display cases. I've done a few insects over the years that are just displayed in glass boxes. There's a, you know, you look at the beauty, but it's such a, when you see all the pins putting them in place, it's such a cruel underside to these displays as well. And that's what I liked, the idea of having boxes that the lids can open, so there's almost like a sense of freedom to them, and that they have this chance of escaping the cases. Now I'm making my way down a very long list of British bees, again all endangered. And what I really enjoy about doing wildlife work is educating myself, doing the research. I have learned so much about the different species. There's a lot that I'd never heard of, and I don't know how I would have heard of many if I had never created most of my artworks. But I also use my own experiences with wildlife to create my artworks. So I live in a seaside town, and I spend a lot of the time on the beach. And the main beach that I go down on isn't sandy, it hasn't got a lot of sand. There's a lot of rock pools. And we have huge areas of clumps of mussels down there. And I don't know, I just find them fascinating. Again, they're strong, but they're fragile. They'll, you know, you can really crush them if you walk on them by mistake and things. And they've got such beautiful colors to them. So I've made a few mussel shell pieces over the years, and most of them are sculptural. And this was based on some photographs that I took down on the beach. And they are made from a base of 1950s vintage sequins, which are black. So that gave me, which I joined together to give my shell base. And then I stitch over the top and through the sequin base, and then create these limpets and things to stick that stitch on top of those threads as well. Harden the fingers. I have a special tool that I use to help me get the needle through the plastic. And this is also part of my plastic pollution series that I have, that I go back to once in a while. And it's mainly marine life that I recreate using plastics. This is a styling memoration. And again, from my own experience, there used to be for a couple of years, there was a styling memoration down on the seafront, and not one of the biggest ones like you get in Brighton and Blackpool in the UK. And I love starlings. I think they're a beautiful bird, again, endangered, but I don't think people really realise, like the sparrows, how endangered these birds are. And this was about trying to create the movements, and it's not a snapshot of a bigger piece of murmuration. So trying to get the shapes that you would see watching the birds move. And there's kind of 3 layers to this. So you have these silhouettes in the background, and then we have that you see like these ghostly birds in the background of the movement, and then you have the bird outlines here from where you just kind of grasp the birds are moving, and then we have the colored ones, and they're not complete, again, like my faces, and it's like those snapshots of color that you'll sometimes get from them, and like the glimpses of wing in there as well. And I picked a peachy color for that time of day that they murmurate as well. This is like quite a big piece for me, 21 inches. I don't tend to work very big, just for how I work, because I work kind of 2-handed, so I have a hand at the back of my work and a hand at the front, so I don't tend to work too big, because it can be I can get quite a painful neck and shoulders from working too big. So I like to work just on the one piece, instead of adding pieces to it. So these are hummingbirds, obviously not local to the UK. These were again inspired by museum piece. In the Natural History Museum, there is a large case of taxidermy hummingbirds, a Victorian collection of hummingbirds. And had been watching, I'd seen the case and taken photos, and I'd then watched a documentary on, actually it was to do with birds in the fashion trade, and they had talked about how hummingbirds have been turned into jewelry, and actually you can still find examples of them, like vintage pieces from the Victorian era. And the Victorians, because of all the travel that was happening, you'd got all the explorers and then collectors appearing of birds. Now, of course, they wanted the hummingbirds alive to be in their cages, but many of the birds died in the transportation, and thousands of these birds died for either being turned into jewelry or to go into these collections. And so I wanted to do this piece where none of the birds are complete again. They are almost like these, these birds have become they weren't living things anymore. They were just items to keep. They'd lost any sense of life to people. So I wanted this to be, like almost like a Chinese hand-drawn wallpaper. Hence I picked this. It's a 1970s wallpaper that I've actually stitched into. So I don't always stitch into fabric. I sometimes stitch into plastic, and I also sometimes stitch into wallpapers, and I prefer to stitch into vintage wallpapers. So I wanted that kind of like muted color, faded over time piece. And these birds are just there for purely decoration. And these birds, being incomplete, are like fading then into the background of the wallpaper. And as you can see in this detailed piece here, there's a bit, this has got some of the tail is not in, and there's a section here. So it really varies from bird to bird how much of the bird is stitched in. Some may just have a wing missing, some will have the chest area missing, like here, but often it's the wings that have gone because they can't fly away. Now I want to end on a piece that I've made this year. It's an installation, and this is about my relationship with birds. So I have a complex relationship with our feathered friends. From a child, I've had a fear of birds and, well, any flying wildlife, to be fair, flying up around me, to the point where if a pigeon is on the path in front of me, I will just stop in my tracks. And I do still do that. I'm not as bad as I used to be, but it is still a factor. The fear and panic of the bird and myself, and the noise of the flapping wings could be a constant worry while walking in particular areas. As a child, I hated going to Trafalgar Square in London because there were so many pigeons. But on the other side of that, I am absolutely fascinated by these beautiful creatures, spending many hours watching them, interacting with the bird feeders. I was just talking about blue tits before we went live, what I captured yesterday. And I've become very protective over my local birds. In this installation called The Birds, all of the birds are in flight, and some gently move like the kingfisher to create a sense of movement, of confusion and beauty. The title makes reference to the Alfred Hitchcock film, but it's also to celebrate the species as well. It's just love and fear. What has been really interesting about this was made specifically for an exhibition I did earlier in the year called I Like Birds. And it was made to go in this gallery space, used to be a shop, so it has these 2 shop windows. And I became very aware how the birds changed to those earlier studio shots where I had them against a white space, and it was more about the shadows that were cast and how they interacted. It was very quiet, and it was just about how the birds moved together. As soon as they went into the window space, when you looked out into the street, they became part of that street scene. It became like every day. But when you looked in through the window, the birds looked trapped, and they looked like they were in a panic and trying to get out. And I hadn't really expected that. I hadn't really thought about how those birds would look in that window. And what did run throughout all of it is that they were quite mesmerizing as well. So there's a picture here of me at the end here, which I'll show you, just to show you scale. The birds are made from organza, and some have more organza on than others. Some are more heavily stitched. Some of the birds have quite transparent, more opaque areas, and they're more inspired by stained glass windows, and then some are more heavily stitched. So then you can look through those wings, in particular like the starling that's flying across my head, and you can look through to other birds in there as well. And it's a piece that I'm now kind of working on to work on a bigger piece of that's very much like this. It's at very early stages, so I can't really say too much more about that, but keep your eyes peeled. So this is where I'm going to end, with me surrounded by birds. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Emily. It was just such a pleasure to learn more about your art practice and to see your work. I'm going to stop your screen share here, and we have some time for Q&A. And I wanted to start with a question for both of you that I was wondering about, which is a little bit about your composition process. You're both collaging a lot of elements that come from different places. You'll have multiple birds or multiple faces with different birds, or in Nikki's case, lots of different types of animals. How do you go about planning your designs? Are you sketching? How does that work?
I tend to make all the different elements first. So I know that I want 30 birds, for example. So I made birds and then I played around with the composition afterwards. So I actually don't have much idea of how they're going to be positioned until I've got them all together. So it kind of evolves as I go along, really. So perhaps slightly different from Emily.
Yeah, so my work is done directly onto a background, so I kind of do a lot of research into what kind of, especially with, say, take the styling memoration. For that one, it was all about getting a sense of a shape. So I wanted that kind of curved shape. So I knew I wanted just bits of bird coming in from the edges, so tips of wings and things. So it was a case of just going through all my kind of research images and video footage that I've taken and just working out what best goes. And I kind of start drawing in the birds. I use nowadays I use a pen that I can iron away afterwards. So I used to just use a basic pen to just draw on, and I used to just make sure I had to stitch over the top, but now I can just iron away mistakes. So I'm a lot more freer with my drawings now. But yeah, it kind of just goes, it's much more organic. I just see what kind of works, and I can take away if I don't like bits. I can just iron it away nowadays and then just add in it elsewhere.
And I think this question applies to both of you as well. Jean would like to know, what is the structure beneath that supports the complex stitching?
It's usually a piece of calico or a piece of plastic. Do you mean what it's stitched onto, or the actual pieces themselves, the pieces that are made pieces?
I think what it's stitched onto, and whether,
Yeah.
I don't know if you have some type of backing providing support with what you're doing.
Well, if it's the layered plastic, the plastic, when it's layered with cellophane and more plastic on the top, is stable enough to be able to, you can just stitch it in its own right. You don't need to add any other stabilizer. It's very strong.
And so I still treat mine like painting. So my fabric, all my base fabrics are stretched straight onto a wooden stretcher, like I would have done a painting. Very occasionally do I use a hoop to work on, because I prefer the tension that I have on working on the stretcher. So that's my way of answering that. I don't have anything kind of fusion wise on the back of my work. Particularly if because sometimes my work can be quite layered with lots of different fabrics. So then anything where I don't have another layer to go through, all the better for my fingers. So yeah, so my structures are, it's all a wooden stretcher base.
And there are a number of questions here about Nikki's use of plastic, so maybe we can go through these kind of quickly.
Yeah.
They would like to know, how do you attach the plastic pieces to the calico? And does the plastic make the art very heavy? And are you concerned at all about the longevity of the plastics?
Right, I attach them to the calico by just stitching them on. It's very simple. They can be actually glued on as well, so that's not a problem. As we know, plastics last for a lifetime and beyond. So I'm not concerned about how long they're going to last. I think they're very robust, actually. People have this misconception that somehow they're going to be fragile and they're going to deteriorate, but actually they are very strong. What was the middle question? Sorry.
Are your pieces very heavy because you're using the plastic?
No, not particularly. The thing about them is they're very robust. You can roll them up. Well, I've got one here next to me, so you can actually roll them up to keep them safe. They're not heavy at all, and it's not as if you've got a piece that you have to frame or glaze. They're actually very, very easy to transport, and not at all heavy. No, not at all.
And let's see, someone was asking about the scale of the work, which is something I'm wondering about as well. I know, Emily, you talked a little bit about the practical reasons why you like to work small, and Nikki, you're working on things for the most part that are much larger. So what do you each like about the size that you choose to work at, and what are maybe some of the challenges of working at that scale?
Well, I think it's unusual to work on a large scale, so that's kind of my USP, if you like. And I just love working on a large scale. And well, Emily, you do much smaller pieces, don't you? It was interesting that we've got quite a few things in common in terms of subject matter, haven't we? So I thought that was really interesting. But sometimes it can be something as simple as, well, I'm going to have an exhibition at Chester Cathedral, and the boards at Chester Cathedral are 8 feet by 4 feet. So I'll make a piece that's 8 feet by 4 feet. So I'm just ambitious to make something bigger and bigger and bigger. I've not made my biggest thing yet. I'm going to be doing that shortly. There's the sky's the limit, really. I think, I just love doing it, and I just like the drama and the colour, I think, with the large pieces.
You see, I would love to work bigger. The biggest piece I've ever done, I think, was about 3 by 2.5 foot. So, and that was quite simple. It looked, if you take my mum's face in that portrait, it was like that. So it looked like a line drawing. So it was very simple and quite quick. Though I'd love to work bigger, and what is great about doing the installation, it gives me an opportunity to work bigger without the physicality of working bigger, by having the separate elements, a bit like what you do, and then you're adding it to the background. But I struggle sometimes with my lack of patience. So working on something, so if I'm doing something that's much more detailed, I have done some portraits that are 2 foot by 3 foot. They take about 10 days for me, but actually they can be quite limited in a day of working on them, because actually the pain that I get in my neck from working on those, and also it's having the space to work that big, because I work directly straight onto the background. I don't change how I work. So I would love to work bigger. I have got a massive stretcher that I've been looking at for about 6 years every day. One day I will get to it. I have a little bit of an idea, but so you never know, but it will take a very long time for me to work on that. Just for me to kind of keep engaged with it. And it can be quite draining sometimes when you're working on something quite constantly, and it's quite nice to have that break. So yeah, I prefer things that are smaller, and it can be quite quick for me to work on, because my brain goes on to the next piece almost straight away sometimes. So I like to be kind of as quick as possible to kind of get that feeling out of me and onto the whatever it is I'm stitching onto.
Because I tend to work quite differently, actually. I think I've got 3 projects on the go at the moment. And the final one that I showed, the St. Wergrove project, that's been going on for months and months and months. So I tend to expect that something is going to take weeks and weeks and weeks to do. And I'm quite patient in that I know that I've got to just keep going at it. So I'm like the archetypical bag lady. I've got bags and bags of stuff, label different projects. So, I guess we're slightly different in that aspect, aren't we?
Yeah.
I think we have time for just one final question. And so for both of you, how do you know when a piece is finished?
It's a kind of instinct, I think.
Yeah.
It's a question that you get asked quite often, and I think if you're a creative person, you kind of know when it's done, and you also know when it's not done, because you're thinking, hang on, I could fit something else in there. So I just have to say it's down to instinct and practice and previous experience, I'd say.
Yeah, I tend to, when I think I've finished, I tend to I don't have a studio, I sit on the sofa and stitch. So I tend to spend the rest of that day with the artwork to the side of me. So I might be watching TV, but I look across to that piece, and I also take photos of it, because it can feel very differently when you look at it as a photograph. And then the next day I will either tweak it, or I kind of go, no, it's done. I think it's done. So I tend to leave a little bit. If there's been one that's kind of tested me a little bit, I'll hide it away, and especially if I've got to go off and do something else, and then I might not look at it for a week or so, and then look at it with more fresher eyes, and then decide if I think it's done.
Yeah, similar.
Well, thank you both so much for being here today and sharing your work on Textile Talks. It has just been such a pleasure to see your art and to learn more about your art practices. So thank you both so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And to our audience, thank you all for watching. Stick around just a couple more minutes, because I'm going to play us out with another selection of fantastic artwork from the SAQA benefit auction. And of course, a thank you to our generous sponsors. We'll be back again next week, same time, same place, for how one donation turned the Berkeley Art Museum into a quilt powerhouse, an interview with Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive curator Elaine Yao, conducted by Teresa Durya Wong, and that's presented by the Quilt Alliance. As always, you can find all the details and our archive of over 200 Textile Talk recordings at SAQA.com/Textile Talks. And if you enjoy Textile Talks, we would love it if you would tell a friend, post about us on social media, or consider supporting us financially with a donation at SAQA.com/TT support. Don't forget to bid in the SAQA benefit auction this Friday, September 13th until October 6th. Textile Talks viewers also get a discount on SAQA membership. You can use code TALKS, that's TALKS, for $20 off the first year of a new membership. I hope you all have a fantastic Wednesday, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.